All right. This is the weekly Sig Docs meeting for Kubernetes documentation on Tuesday, December 19th, our last meeting of the year. We're all still alive, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed after 1.9. So let's see, let's start with a note that yes, this is our last meeting. There will be no meeting next week. Happy holidays. Also, Jared Bati will be running the first meeting of 2018. I will be out on vacation. So it looks like we have one new person, Chris Short. Welcome to the show. Am I correctly? You are new, right? I'm not just
I'm newish. I was here last week.
Okay, well,
close enough. It is the end
still
of the
new
year.
enough to celebrate. Welcome again.
Thank you.
All right, so version 1.9 retrospective. The docs and the release notes are live. So let's talk a little bit about how 1.9 went. Jennifer and Nick, do you want to start with the release notes and tell us about how they went this time, how they differed from 1.8? And don't need to go into a whole lot of detail, just by way of high-level overview or summary.
I can keep it short and leave room for Nick to add things. So for 1.8, just to give people a baseline understanding, for the first time, the release notes were completely manually generated. So I don't remember whether it was Caleb or Chase who put a markdown file into the features repo and directed every SIG to go add their release notes manually to that one file. So there was no generation from the release note strings in the pull requests. The reason for this was because in previous releases, for all that there were various iterations toward improving the automation process, it wasn't working and there was too much cleanup to be done at the last minute to render the content in those strings actually intelligible to a user. That was difficult from managing content edits perspective. Different folks had different views about that. I found it difficult because we had two writers. It was great to have writers. Also, the other thing that was new for 1.8 is that there were actually representatives from Sig Docs working on the release notes. It wasn't just the release lead struggling to make it the release notes intelligible. That helped a lot. And as far as the product, the end result was concerned, I think that probably the quality of the 1.8 release notes is somewhat better than the quality of the 1.9 release notes. I'm just comparing the two critters I have to compare to. But the 1.8 release notes, in my opinion, and I did work on both, although I was shadowing for 1.8, the 1.8 release notes took a lot more work. That manual process, at least from the Sig Docs representative's perspective, was considerably more burdensome and arduous and led to pretty crazy stuff the week of the release. So I suggested that we look at least some kind of semi-automated process for 1.9, and that as part of that, we try to get the strings getting pulled into the generated release notes improved. The only thing that we did for that was to edit the guidance in the pull request template for the release note string a little bit. This is like any documentation. You know, people have to read it and understand it and comply with it to be effective. And I'm not sure how effective it was. So we wound up, Nick and I, having to clean up a lot of content for 1.9. And for me, and I think for Nick too, we wound up having to go into the PRs to figure out just what the heck was going on. A lot of the release note content simply didn't describe anything useful, either to a code contributor or to a Kubernetes end user. And so we had to go digging to figure out what really needed to be there. And again, I can't speak for Nick. I had to do a ton of triage on that. There simply wasn't time to analyze in depth And my default, as we got down to the wire, was to whack things out altogether. That seemed to be fine because, well, Anthony and I think Lucas and maybe Phil Liggett also went in and whacked out a bunch of stuff at the 11th hour and 59th minute. And I think this is a case where less is more. But short version, the automated process doesn't work great either. We don't have a good solution. So Nick is going to come up with a great solution that does all the things right for 1.10.
So I am going to now sound like I'm disagreeing with everything that Jennifer said, but I'm really not. Okay. So, all right. So I'm actually a fan of the automated process as I believe that it could be. And here's what I mean by that. I'm not a big fan of the manual process because, we know how hard it is to, put a gun to people's heads and make them do what they're supposed to do, and then they don't do it till the last minute, and and there's always that stress, and are they going to do it, and then are we going to have to do it ourselves, and all of that stuff. And so that right there, to me, that is a reason right there to do the automated process. But there were some significant improvements that I think we can make to the automated process. Number one, I think the very first thing is to clarify that not everything in the world needs a release note. And I think that in the pull request template, we need a flag for does it need a release note, and is this release note targeted towards code-based contributors or towards end users? And once we have those things, then we will be able to, A, eliminate a lot of the garbage that didn't need to be there in the first place. And B, we'll actually be able to generate two different types of release notes. One for the code contributors and one for end users. And the one for end users is probably going to be considerably smaller. And also, if we can take the, in terms of the actual generation process itself, what I'd like to do is change that so that rather than just pulling the release note string, I'd like to pull the release note string and then the description from the pull request. Because that's going to save a lot of time. Just knowing that what we had to do to turn those release note strings into something cogent. If it was all in one place, it's really not a big deal to just go through, read it. Does that make sense? Yes. Whack out what's extra. It's just a heck of a lot simpler. And I think if we did those things, we'd actually have a good and manageable process that would enable us to produce something pretty close to the end result of the manually generated process. That's my suggestion.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, with the PR descriptions, yeah, I think having adding a field to the PR template for saying, does this need a release note? Yes, no, is a really good idea, just to get feature developers thinking about that early in the process.
Right. And then what kind of release note is it? Is this an end user release note or a code contributor release note?
Sure.
So,
I mean, pulling a description from the PR description still puts you in the bag of that information is only as good as the descriptive capability of the PR opener.
And absolutely, but people put a lot more information into that field than in one line for the release note.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, I mean that's what we wound up doing is we would look at the release note, go, this makes no sense. Click on the link, go read the description. Oh, now I know what they mean, and then turn it into a real sentence. So to have it right there just saves time. That's all.
There's also, I forgot this, but there is an issue with the script that's generating the release notes now anyway. I kept thinking I had figured it out, and I haven't. But if the PR is not completely appropriately tagged, the release note tool pulls from the description field instead of from the release note field, even if there is release note content in there. It's some combination, and I just haven't had a chance to follow up on it, of whether or not the heading release note appears in the PR, and whether or not that string is marked up with a backtick for code markup. Those two things the tool seems to choke on. So there was some odd stuff there too, where when Nick and I were working on the release notes, sometimes we got release note content and sometimes we got description content.
How much of a percentage of the output that you worked with, what would you say as a percentage that represented?
The problem,
yeah,
problem notes where the script didn't seem to be working, somewhere around 10-15%.
Okay, so not terrible, but enough to be
It wasn't
kind of
terrible, but the thing is that I also wasn't tracking it terribly carefully because there were so many cases where I was in the PR anyway, because even if the release note content was getting pulled in appropriately, it was still not intelligible. And as Nick knows, often the description string was better than the release note string.
Yes, almost, I would say 90% of the time the description string was better than the release note string.
Although one of the reasons I started noticing the script problem was because when I had to ping a dev because I couldn't make any sense out of what was going on, if I went back and looked at the release note carefully, it was because, in fact, the release note string hadn't got pulled in, and I was missing it just because I was skipping over it in the PR itself. So there's a whole lot of variables here.
My feeling is we're going to have to do some work on the script anyway. If we're going to implement this these flags for the release notes and all that. So, I mean, and we've got 3 months to do that. So,
sure.
That I see that as a non-issue right now. We just need to keep it in mind. But we got plenty of time to work on that if we start on that now. So
the other thing that I think that I'd like to see us move toward, again, this is, if we do it, needs to be iterative, is what I brought up last week about moving forward sooner rather than later with figuring out how to get Sig Docs representation onto the other SIGs and providing SIGs with some hands-on training in writing good PR content, whatever field we want to pull from. I mean, this benefits everybody ultimately.
Sure. In the interest of time, I'm going to ask you guys to wrap it up in about 30 seconds.
Okay. The other question, just so 30 seconds worth. Do we want release notes at the issues level instead? Just to throw another thing into the discussion, something more like the KEP process. So.
I like that.
Thank you. From the feature doc side, the process this time overall felt much smoother. I think that was a combination of being able to learn from Steve's experience with 1.8 and specifically there wasn't so much of a crush getting release notes, I think, because I was kind of a nervous little house dog going after developers right from the first, being like, hey, where's your PR? Hey, did you open this PR? The milestone's passed. Did you open your PR? And just being willing to hunt down feature developers individually, and just work on a much more of an interrupt basis in terms of actually encouraging developers to hew more closely to the release milestones. So that worked really well. What also worked really well is I benefited a lot from, especially at the end, Steve's experience with auto-generating doc. And so Steve opened, I think, a very nice series of 4 PRs to handle all of the auto-generated doc. and getting that into the release mega branch. So that was a much gentler experience than I think Steve had in 1.8. So thanks. Made my life a hell of a lot easier. There is always something in every release. 1.9 was no exception. So when it came time to actually merge the mega branch into master, what we had noticed was that everything looked fine on the mega branch for the Netlify deploy for the mega branch, but when we except we noticed there was one little bit of the Netlify preview had just started to fail. I didn't think that was going to be a blocker. I merged it to master anyway. It was a total blocker. And what with the help of Andrew and Steve on Friday evening, we figured out that what was happening was that there had been an unclean, is the adjective that I'm choosing to use, an unclean PR in the release mega branch. It ended up being something like 46 commits for 9 files changed. There was like a revert. No, there was a rebase and like 6 reverts in this PR. And that ended up, those reverts ended up causing some merge conflicts that didn't need to be merge conflicts. So I think it was really a singular problem. I don't know that we need to like deal with that at a policy level. I don't think we need to have like a no reverts, no rebases and commits. But I do think that I think that what we can do is say, hey, clean commits only. If you get to a point where a PR is that hairy, close the PR, cherry pick commits. Basically, don't do anything that isn't immediately. Don't do anything for which the timeline is not well-defined, self-contained, and self-disclosing. Andrew.
So I just want to add to that. What made that problem sort of insidious is that you couldn't tell that those problems were there based on the GitHub interface when you looked at the PR. It was only when I reviewed the actual commit notes through a different Git client that I could see that it had reverted some of the changes. Like you didn't see it in the file diff for that PR. So there was like no way to know. So when we initially approved the PR, we were just looking at the diff. So it was like, oh, that looks fine. So yeah, I mean, it seems like it'll be a rare occurrence, but I sort of feel like just in general, when we come across PRs that have a lot of commits attached to them, we should just scrutinize them a little bit more.
Yeah, it was looking at the actual commit history as opposed to the file diff that revealed the nature of what was going on. And I didn't think to check the commit history because why would we?
Yeah, I didn't either. It wasn't until wait, what the heck is going on? Did we have to dig down into it?
So that all worked out fine in the end, but it was hairy in the moment. And I think we can avoid that just by practicing, I think, stronger scrutiny of PRs, feature PRs with multiple commits, especially something like 46 commits in it. I think overall 1.9 felt like a much more gentle experience. That may also be just due to this, it was a smaller release. But it felt like a smoother process overall. It felt like I definitely benefited from Steve being introspective about the process for 1.8 and iterating accordingly. So for future releases, I've already talked with Jennifer and Nick, and Jennifer is going to be the release lead for 1.10 for feature docs. And Nick is going to handle the release notes for 1.10 and shadow Jennifer for that process. And then Nick is going to be the release meister for 1.11. And we will need to get somebody to do release notes for 1.11, but that's several months off yet, so we can take our time. Chris Short, you expressed an interest in shadowing a release to see if that's something that you'd be interested in doing. Is that something you're interested in doing?
Yes.
So Jennifer and Nick, you will have a shadow for 1.10.
Awesome.
Right. 1.9 retrospective. Moving on. So I had an idea about doing a Docs Summit in 2018, where we just get together, all of us in person, and not really do a sprint, but get together and like, do some mutual work to talk about Docs priorities and figure out like what as a SIG we're going to prioritize for the year ahead. So just very unscientifically, show of hands, who is interested in doing a Docs Summit in 2018?
Depends on where it is.
Sure.
You can have it in Ohio. I'll be there.
It'll be in Guadalajara.
Depending
everybody
on
has to go to Zach.
that could be potentially wonderful or potentially terrible, depending on when you come. If you come in the summertime, get ready for the rainy season. But no, we can talk about location. I'm not wholly opposed to Ohio. I'm not in love with Ohio either. We can get we can take a poll, but I mean, it seems like there's enough interest to pursue it as an idea. So, okay, I will get on that and let's make that a thing. Okay, supported documentation versions. Just really quickly, we had an issue. A user opened issue requesting that we publicize which versions of the documentation we support, or which versions of Kubernetes are supported in documentation. There was a PR that was opened and merged that specified current +2. And in the interim, we've decided on current +4. So if we're going to stick with that, and I think it makes sense to do so, then let's open another PR and specify current +4 rather than current +2. Let's see, follow up on reviewer conventions and doc files. Steve and Andrew, do you have anything more this week about, last week we talked about investigating whether putting names of reviewers or owners in the front matter of a file, like in the title block, whether that was possible to draw automation from that. It's been a busy week, so I don't know if you've had the chance to follow up on that.
I haven't done any work along those lines. The more I think about it, the more I like not trying to put owners in the individual files, except in special cases, but to have some files where we list what we call either owners or reviewers, and maybe categorize those according to have some way of saying this. This document is in this category, and then we have a list of reviewers for that category.
So just trying to get really granular in the owners file.
Sorry, say that again.
So just trying to get really fine-grained in the owners file in terms of like being able to like specify a reviewer for a certain type or category of documentation. And
yeah, and I don't think it'd have to be terribly fine-grained, but on our wiki right now, we have a list of tech reviewers. It needs to be expanded, but there are, maybe 12 to 15 categories there.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that seems reasonable to me as well.
Mm-hmm. I got to find a different room here, so I'll be walking as I talk.
Andrew, is there anything more you want to say about that?
Yeah, I think I have an idea of what it should look like. It just, I think we need to talk to the people that work on the tooling. And I think that was on my to-do list, and I had forgotten about it. So
okay, 1.9 was a little busy. Okay.
Because we just need to have them modify the bot, so like we can just specify whatever category it is, do like a slash in the category name in the PR description, and then it should just choose from one of those categories in the owner's file.
Sure.
Like, I don't think that would be too hard.
Okay. Moving on to the, I want to say it was like back in either October or November, we floated the idea of having an automation summit shortly after the first of the year, where we talk about the state of auto-generated docs and sort of where we are and where to go forward from there as part of the automation proposal that Steve had put forward. That I would still love to go forward with that. Does anyone else? I mean, does anybody like? Does anyone think that we should let this go? I mean, I can't really. That's the wrong question to ask. If we aim for early February, does that give Steve and Andrew? Does that give you enough time to put together an outline of what to discuss at an automation proposal?
Yeah, early February would be great.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I apologize if I'm missing something really obvious here, but what is the thinking behind making an automation summit a thing separate from the Sig Docs summit?
I feel like we're double loading summits. It sounds like, Zach, you just want a meeting, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas when you say Sig Docs Summit, you want to actually get people physically together in a room somewhere on the planet.
Yes.
Okay.
So yes,
Okay.
I'm overloading the term summit here. Let's just have a meeting, the automation meeting, all automation all the time.
In which case the timing in the schedule seems nice, because if we get, sort of coherent discussions of automation going in February, then that can be an item for the no longer overloaded summit.
Perfect. All right. Let's see. I'm not sure. We have an item for building a community site for developer contributions. I don't see who added this. Whoever added it? Oh, Jared. Okay. Tell us more, Jared. Tell us about a community site.
Sure. So Joe Beta fired off an email this morning that was like, "Hey, we're thinking a lot about KEPs and Sig
What is a KEP?
So these are basically like contributor guidelines. If that makes sense.
But what does KEP stand for?
I will send you a pull request from Ryan Grant that has the KEP template. Honestly, I'm hedging because I don't know what the hell KEP is.
Very good.
So, yeah. But here is the KEP template. So, yeah.
Do you mind dropping that link in chat as well?
Sure. And is there actually a canonical definition of KEP? There's not. So your question will just have to get unanswered. Anybody else have the answer for this?
Kubernetes enhancement proposal.
Oh, God, what a fucking terrible name. Okay, anyway. Thank you.
Don't shoot the messenger.
Oh, no, I'm not. Sorry, I'm not blaming you.
I know, Jared. I'm giving you a hard time.
I
couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more.
Just shoot me in the face. Anyway, so there's these things called KEPs that are being talked about, and Joe Beta is like, we should have these on the website. It'd be really nice if these were on the website. And I think this falls under a bigger question around where does sort of developer contribution content land on the site? Something that we've talked about. And I think Joe and I immediately descended into sort of like tool chain questions. This thread is available to everybody in the group. It's sent out to Sig Docs group. I think, I don't know enough about KEPs, but I also realize that sort of arguing with Joe around sort of so Joe also was like, we should build a whole different site that uses Hugo to do this. And I'm like, okay.
Welcome to my world, Jared. Welcome to my world.
I'm like, why would we do that? So, I think we kind of like fell down the toolchain rat hole pretty quickly in the conversation. But I think there is there's merit in having these proposals in a single place, as well as having, say, contributor guidelines in a single place for different SIG groups. And it's something that, you know, Zach and you and I kicked around. It's also something that came up in the developer summit, the contributor summit at KubeCon. So I just wanted to share this email with folks, and you know, if there's any ideas on how to address this, I am all ears. You can also feel free to jump in on the email thread and comment there. But I think fixing the contributor process and having content around it would be a huge win for us as Sig Docs. I think there's a lot of knowledge here in this group that we can share with the developer community. I think the current contribution process is very broken.
I'm sorry, Jared, I missed that last bit due to hilarity in your background.
I think the current contribution process is very fragmented and broken.
That's fair. Sure, this is a conversation to continue, obviously. But let's.
Andrew, do you want to say anything about the contributor user journeys that we've been?
Yeah, so contributors has been one of the buckets that we've kind of designed into the user journeys portal. And I've been talking with Paris Pittman, who has some of that for community contribution and things like that. So we can start populating that area. Because I agree, definitely there needs to be a lot more documentation about contribution for the different sort of things, both code, docs, community, ecosystem. So we have a place for it. We just we just need to get it out the door.
Excellent.
But it's also so I missed last week's meeting, Andrew, but that it's on the short list of user journeys that we want as part of the MVP for the user journeys portal.
Yeah, because I think for that section, instead of having their own like landing pages for each like persona, we can just use the I want to section and just have like a list of links to the resources for each of those, contribution things. That way we can kind of short circuit that and not have to spend too much time on it.
Yep, and we could even prototype, just a bucket for the KEP proposals. In other words, the proposals. And we could do that and show people how that would work, and maybe short circuit the tool chain discussion, at least, as part of the next steps. Because this seems like something where we've got the tool chain figured out. The issue is the content, and it's real easy to fall down the tool chain rabbit hole here.
That's real.
I like the idea of including the caps in this a lot, because I'm hoping that will also help us normalize the release note process. I'm not going to go back into the release note discussion, but just to let y'all know, I've had ideas in the back of my head about, and I've talked a little bit with Jace about sort of piggybacking a better, sort of release note process on the rollout of the CAP process. If we're getting features and issues well defined at the beginning of the release, however that should be described to users when the release is done, should be something that we could get pretty well defined before implementation happens. And obviously refined as implementation changes actual functionality. So, transparency all around.
So in terms of in terms of actionability, what do we need to do as next steps? Like where do we go from here?
Well, I'll take this as an action item to study this and you know, chime in on how you know, just what needs to be done, and I'll make this one of my work items for Q1.
Awesome. Let's see. Just making a note. All right. That is all that we have on the agenda right now. Is there anything else that folks would like to discuss?
I want to just throw out a question, not to talk about today, but just so people can be thinking about it. What do we do with the COPS documentation? Like, COPS is getting to a point where Chris Love would like to have this officially documented, and he would like to see it under Kubernetes.io. There are a lot of questions around that, like, do we want to do that at all? And if so, where do we put it? So that's about where I am with it. I just would ask you all to, you know, think that through, because we're going to want to have a full discussion on that in the next, you know, in January.
Sorry, I had to unmute. Steve, can you give a little bit more background about COPS and why it's a question about what to do with the documentation?
It's I know very little about it, but you know, my short, you know, my small understanding of it is that it's a setup tool, and it helps you get set up on AWS. AWS, whatever they call their, you know, compute engine like thing, and that eventually COPS could be used for other, you know, other clouds, but I think right now it's primarily an AWS thing. So that's the reason for you know, the question of how much do we you know, where do these things belong? Do they belong in under Kubernetes.io, or do they belong in someplace like the AWS documentation?
Sure. And that's a really good open question. We dealt with something very similar about Prometheus specific content recently. So yeah, that's a longer discussion. So let's talk about that. Talk about provider specific.
But isn't COPS in the Kubernetes binary?
Is it?
It's in the repo is Kubernetes/COPS. I don't know how it's built into, you know, how it gets built into different components.
But it is a project under the Kubernetes org.
Yeah.
Okay. That shades the discussion somewhat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why we sort of need to support it.
I've asked Chris Love to come to one of our meetings in January, and he's planning to do that.
Okay. Chris Love invited to join. Yeah, it would be great if we could get Chris here to be part of that discussion. Yeah, that's I don't know that we need to put up a whole lot of process structure around it, but it would be nice to at least have a standard for to think all the way through the question of what do we support of all of the various things out there. What do we choose to support? What is our test for documentation on Kates.io? And at least think all the way through that. I don't know that we need to get super heavy with it, but I do think that's something we need to think all the way through. As I think we'll start seeing this more and more with various bits of like CNCF infrastructure, various bits of cloud architecture and whatnot. Okay. Last call for things to talk about.
one thing with the just a note from Joe around that. I'm looping both you and Steven to chat about like how do we centralize Sig Docs Sig contribution content and this whole KEP thing. So expect he's already asked for access to the site so he can build it himself. Then I have said, and I am saying no, but I'm putting you two in front of him to help guide him to his site. So.
Jared, can you CC me on that too, please?
I would love to.
You'd better the devil you keep close, right? Well, never mind. That was jet lag.
I admire his enthusiasm, and I want to channel that into a really solid design doc versus him mucking about in case.io.
Yeah. No, I think it would be useful. I'm not trying to engage. I'm not suggesting I would engage in any back channel, but if he knows I'm on it, it might help.
Hey, please back channel away. All right.
But what it's worth, we have this conversation about Heptio documentation all the time too.
If you guys switch to Hugo, I'd like to know how it goes, but it seems like Jekyll's de facto standard right now. So anyway.
Yeah.
Not touching that one.
Agreed. The last thing that I think would be helpful for anybody is for a really enthusiastic temporary project to become permanent. And there's nothing so permanent as the temporary project that works. So. All right. Much shorter call this time, 3. All right, that is the SIG meeting. Happy holidays, everybody. See you again in 2 weeks. I will see you in 3 weeks. Have a wonderful end of the year.
See you all in the new year.